Check one.
How about now? Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Let's put this down. Okay, good. Now you can hear me. Okay. Thank you for that. That really was fun, and hopefully as we, experience and get more exposed to lively music like this, I think even on a Sunday morning, we could also come alive, right?
That is the hope.
It helps us, the ones that are up here, to know that you guys are awake and engaged. And so thank you for your participation in worship. It's not entertainment. Amen? Good morning. Welcome to Central United Methodist Church. My name is David Lee, and I'm one of the pastors here. And I want you to know that your presence here today is a blessing to us. And we hope that our time together, as we pray, offer words to God, as we sing our praises, maybe even our sorrows to God, as we look and yearn to hear a word from God, that this time that we have together can be a blessing to you as well. And we hope that you will find Central, this faith community, to be a safe place for you, where you will feel encouraged, where you will be prayed for, where you will be loved and cared and received as you are. And so thank you for being here this morning. If you've been with us, you will know that we have been on a campaign. Did you know that? Right? The politicians are having their campaign, and we at Central are also putting on our own campaign. As a Church of Jesus Christ here, which is to love our neighbor. That's been what our campaign has been about this fall, right? That during this political season, we are putting in a campaign to love our neighbors, regardless, no matter what. Despite differences, we are saying, as followers of Christ, we believe we're called to love. And we're called to love our neighbors. Not as they become and act more like us, but as they are. And, at first, this series really was kind of targeted towards this season where we seem to be more divided, where it seems to be, there's been this kind of like divisiveness, and the rhetoric has been ugly and hateful at times. And so what we were trying to do here in our campaign was to reflect and to really be able to witness and show what it means to be a follower of Christ in a season like this. Right? Even if we disagreed, whether it's ideologies or policy, how can we still go about this process that is Christ-like? Because that shouldn't be separate from the left or the right. How can we go about this in a way where we treat others with respect, not talk down or to name call, but to be loving? That is our posture, our witness. That is the measure of being a Christian. That is the measure of being a Christian. It's not, is this conservative or liberal, but the question that we ask is it Christ-like? Is it Christ-like? Period. This is the question that we ought to be asking. Is this Christ-like? Because that is the standard for people who say that they follow Christ in their life. I will tell you though, because I'm a human being that is living in this time and this place right now. And so I will tell you that since Hurricane Helene went through this area and then to western North Carolina, just devastating parts of our state where we have special ties, where we know of friends and families that live there, as well as those in the South, right? As Tammy mentioned, South Carolina and Florida. And so, as I've been experiencing all of this going on, this campaign to love our neighbor has become more personal, more intimate, right? There's less posturing or less politicking, but personal because we know these places. We've been to these places. Maybe we grew up in these places and we know people that live there, people that have been in harm's way, people that have been injured or hurt and have even lost their lives. And so it's become personal now. And so the question that I've been exploring, and maybe you've been exploring this with me, is as a church is okay, what does it mean to love our neighbors here today? What does it mean to be loving our neighbors here today? And I hope that is something that we can wrestle with together. Because right now, it is no longer just an abstract exercise. It is a practice that we have to be engaged in. Because it's very real and it's very personal. And as followers of Christ, and I'm going to keep saying that because I want us to be reminded that we're followers of Christ, which means that we stand for what he stands for and that we should be about what he's about. As followers of Christ, what does it mean for us to love our neighbors here, today? Here in our community, in our church as well, but also in those places that have been devastated by the hurricanes. The passage that we're going to look at today, I would say Jesus uses his harshest language, in my opinion, to spell out what it means for us to love our neighbors. We will look at Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 to 40. I began ministry at a time when TVs weren't around, and so people took this time to pick up their Bibles and turn to the passage. But now, they just look back at me and go, come on, we're ready. Right? Matthew chapter 25, we're going to begin on verse 31 and we're going to go to 40. So, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me." This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. I want to tell you that I am very proud of our church. On the way that we lived out our faith and loved our neighbor. when we put those meat, when we put the meat on the grills, it was like we put flesh on our faith. Are you following the metaphor a little bit, right? Because that's what Jesus did for us, right? John chapter 1 tells us that the Word put on flesh and made his dwelling among us. And on that Sunday, after Halim went through, Open Table led the way, and we served 325 meals. Open Table continues to faithfully carry out this ministry week after week. And then, when we issued the call for donations, right? Again, this church, you stepped up, and the donations poured in. Some gave money, some gave of their time, and we were able to make sure that the things that we were collecting were able to get to the people that needed it. And about a week or about 10 days ago, I got word from our district and our conference that actually all of our collection sites in those disaster areas, right? Those are like strategically placed, right? Those sites have all been saturated now, right? With donations and volunteers. And so we've been asked to pause. Not stop and kind of put it behind us, but just pause. To breathe until further notice. We will continue to take donations, and we will continue to be ready when we're called upon to help in some way. In fact, if anything, we're getting more specific requests now that I'm seeing pop up, whether it's pastors or churches that are saying this is what's needed in this area. I think things like generators, things like butane, right? Another specific thing that the district asked for was if you are willing to be a driver and you have a truck and a trailer and you're willing to put yourself on a list of names, then you may be called upon. Now, obviously, you can't go at a moment's notice if you have something going on, so that's why they want to create a list. So that if you can't go, somebody next in line can go. But that's because up in, I think it's Avery County, they need, you can't just drive in semi-trucks. You need to coordinate with the people on the other side, and you need these trucks with trailers that's able to bring in the stuff as needed. And so that's something that they're continuing to try to work out. But I do want to encourage you that during this time to pause, to take a breath, to gather yourself, because sometimes the adrenaline kicks in, right? And you don't know, you just keep going. And then before long, your body lets you know that you need to stop, right? So long before you get to that point, gather yourself, breathe, take time to renew, to rest, because our bishop tells us and reminds us that this is not a sprint. This is not something that we're going to fix like in the next couple of weeks, but think of it more as a marathon. This is a marathon. So we need to pace ourselves so that we can make sure that we can be there to help for the long haul. Does that make sense? Yeah? Brian Mateer is the conference representative for missional engagement, and he's been heading up the disaster relief efforts at the conference level. And in the last week or so, he's been kind of educating pastors and thereby churches, and this is me sharing this information with you. He's been educating us on the 3 stages of disaster relief. The 3 stages of disaster relief. And the first stage is relief. And this is what we have done, right? This is feeding the hungry. This is collecting the donations and making sure that they're able to get to where they need to go. This is the relief part. This is the emergency. Right now, we need it. Can you, all hands on deck, can you help with money or goods or whatever it is? But alongside that, we've also actually had first responders that have responded from all over the country and have come in, right? This has been going on for a little while. And so these are first responders who've come in from all over the country to engage in search and rescue missions specifically, right? To focus on those critical areas and people that may be in need and in danger. And Lake Junaluska Assembly, I believe, has been where they've been housing them and feeding them. And so they've seen it as their ministry to care for the first responders who've come. And they have been active in engaging in these missions. So that's the first stage. That's relief. And then comes response. Response is the next step, or the stage. And this is when we send in trained early response teams, ERTs, that's what they're calling them, ERTs. So we had first the professional responders, right? That was the first wave. And now in the coming weeks, we will be sending in volunteer teams who've gone through the training to go in, to have boots on the ground to actually serve those areas of need, whatever is needed. The conference has been offering trainings. If this is something that you're interested in, let us know, because I believe there could be more offerings of trainings so that you can be trained to be able to go when called upon. But the second stage is response, and that's the stage that we're in now. We're in the response stage when we're getting our ERTs ready to go in and to serve those areas that are in need. And then there is the third and final stage, which is called recovery. Recovery. And this is the long haul. This is the long-term, ongoing work of rebuilding the communities that have been devastated. And this will take years. So it was helpful for me to just acknowledge the devastation that has occurred in these areas. Infrastructures have been destroyed in some of these places. Roads and water systems, gone. Homes and neighborhoods and communities. And so, to recover, this is the work of recovery, to rebuild these areas that have been devastated, and that will take years. Our superintendent, David Christie, shared with me and some other pastors about a story from his experience. Back in 2004, I wasn't here in this conference, but back in 2004, I may be getting the years mixed up, but he was serving in the Candler-Canton area, which is towards that Asheville area, right? So you guys are all nodding your heads because you guys know this better than I do. So there was a storm or there was a flood that went through. Does that sound right? Back in 2004, floods. And he said that he was there in that area when the flood had gone through. And then when he actually moved to a different church from there, which was in 2012, that's 8 years later, he said UMCOR, the United Methodist Committee on Relief, was still there, rebuilding and finishing up the last homes in that area. UMCOR, this is the United Methodist branch that deals with relief and disaster. They are very experienced. They don't just roll in, take the photos, and roll out. They stay and they finish the work. This is part of our portion dollars. If you're not Methodist, if you're new to Methodism, right? We give to the denomination. So this is part of our denominational apportionment money at work. And also, UMCOR, the organization in our denomination that works on the relief, all monies that are donated to them go directly and only to the relief work, never to the overhead. They raise that money separately, so that when it comes down to situations like this, all the money that comes in goes 100% towards the work. So you don't have to worry about where is this going to be spent, right? Not that it shouldn't be, right? Because I think people should be paid what they're worth and what they do. But UMCOR, you can trust that all the money that you do donate will go towards the work that is being done. And they will be there for years to come as we do this work of recovery. And this will take years. I want to pivot now to the passage that we looked at earlier, and I hope that I can bring the two together at the end, right? Because I think there is a connection there. So I want to pivot to our passage that we just looked at, and in chapter 25 of Matthew's Gospel, if you look at it, you're going to find that there are 3 parables of judgment. 3 judgment parables, right? The first one they list is the 10 bridesmaids. Remember that one? Right? With the lamp and the oil and all that stuff. There's the parable of the talents, where the owner of the house or the master gives out coins. And the third one is the one that we looked at, the parable of the sheep and the goats. This parable is also known as, or called, the parable of the Last Judgment. The parable of the Last Judgment. And we're told that Jesus, on that day, he will come in his glory with his angels, sit on his throne. All the nations or peoples will be gathered there, and then he will begin to separate people to the right and to the left, as a shepherd separates sheep from the goats. And we're told that to those on the right, he says, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom." Why? Because I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger or a foreigner in your land and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. And to those on the left, he will say, we didn't read this part, but to those on the left, he will say, "You who are accursed, depart from me." For? And he goes through the whole list again. "For I was hungry, and you didn't give me any food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, a foreigner in your land, and you did not welcome me. I was naked, and you gave me no clothing. I was sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." And surprisingly, we're told that both groups had no idea that this was happening in their life, right? And both of them respond, "Lord, when did we see you," right? "Hungry and thirsty. When did we see you? It's sick and in prison. When did we see you as the foreigner in our land and not welcome you or welcomed you?" And Jesus will say to them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me. And just as you did not do it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did not do it to me." Jesus is taking very personally how we engage or not engage the poor and the hungry, the foreigner and the sick and the imprisoned. Jesus is taking it very personally, whether we do it or whether we don't. The most vulnerable among us. There's a famous painting of this. Are we able to get it? Because if not, I was going to try to do something else. Can we see this? I don't know how visible it is to you guys. There's a very famous painting of this. You may have, if you've been to the Sistine Chapel, you may have seen it. I don't know. I have not. But this is a very famous painting by Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, and it's called The Last Judgment, and this is what it looks like. Does that seem familiar to some of you? Have you seen this before? Yeah? And so you could see Jesus in the center, right, on his throne, and then he's got the people on the right and then people on the left, right? We're gonna come back to this in a little bit, but I will say this: when it comes to this passage that we're looking at today, it is a parable, right? It is a parable, which means that we ought not take everything that we read in the story literally, because As people of faith, we believe we are saved by grace, not by works. Right? Thanks be to God for that. Right? We are saved by grace, not by works. But think about what a parable is, right? It's a story that is really, in my opinion, meant to provoke you a little bit, to shake you a little bit about the ways you look at the world and what you think is normal or not normal, right? And not only is it meant to shake you a little bit of the reality around you, but it's meant to convict you. And it's meant to challenge you so that you do something about it. So that you go beyond just the status quo and the usual ways of doing things, of what everyone else is up to. It's meant to challenge you to do something. And Jesus here uses his harshest language in talking about our responsibility as people of faith. To those who are hungry and poor, to the foreigner, the sick, and in prison. Jesus doesn't want us to see it as just an add-on, right? When it's convenient for us, or when we have the time for us to engage in this kind of work. Rather, he's trying to say, this is what it means. This is what it means to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. That you are to be little Christs. That's what the word Christian means, that you are little Christs. And following means that we are saying and doing the things that Jesus said and did, which means that we are treating people the way Jesus treated people, with love and respect. And this is what loving your neighbor looks like. I was surprised that in our passage, that both groups were surprised, right? They were like, what? It was you, right? We didn't see, when did we see you, right? It's like they had no idea how one group was serving Jesus and the other group wasn't, but they both had no idea. How did they miss the boat on this? That surprised me when it comes to this, right? How did the ones, especially those who weren't living in the loving way, how did they not see that they weren't doing that, right? It was like surprising to me, it was puzzling to me. And I think Michelangelo in his painting actually highlights this surprise that he sees from the people. And so, do we have that one? There's this guy in the painting. This guy is this one this guy's on the left, if you couldn't tell. This guy's on the left, and he's got his hand like this. He's like, how did this happen, right? What? How did I miss the boat on this? How did I not see this coming? How did I end up here? And that's what this man represents to me. The surprise. What? What do you mean? I went to church. I served on this committee. Do you know how much I help with this and help with that? What do you mean? How did I end up here? That's what it seems to be. That's what it seems like is happening here. How did things go wrong like this? And I think we don't have to keep seeing that picture, but and I think this man and the ones that were on the left, I think he missed that his neighbors included more than just their family and friends, more than just the ones that are sitting next to you, but it included every one of those people that Jesus mentioned. Those that are hungry, those that are thirsty, those without clothing, those that are foreigners, those that are sick, those that are in prison, the most vulnerable among us. I think that's what Jesus was telling them, that you missed out on loving your neighbor. You didn't miss out on loving your friends and family, but you missed out on loving your neighbor. And that's what it means to be followers of Christ. How are we doing on that account? You know, if I were to say, Because I will tell you this. As a pastor, because I work full-time as a pastor, right? I'm being paid as a full-time pastor. And so a lot of my work, a lot of my time actually is involved with a lot of people in church. Very rarely do I meet people outside the church, right? So I feel like I'm one of those ones that are missing the boat on this, right? And so what does it mean for people, right, that have full-time jobs, that have families, right, that are full-time Christians in some ways, right, because that's what we're called to be, full-time Christians. What does it mean then, right? How do we not miss the boat when it comes to loving our neighbors, when it comes to doing something that Jesus says is vital, is right up there with loving God? When you say you love God, you're supposed to be doing this too. And I think a few things come to mind in terms of why we could be missing the boat, why we could be like that guy, which is I think sometimes we are just too busy. We're just too busy. And we don't have time for all that stuff. I think another thing that I think is this is not the best way to put it, but we are very self-centered. And so the whole world revolves around what's going on with me in my life. It doesn't have to be in a bad way, but we're so consumed with what's going on with my life and with what's mine, we can't really see outside of that. And I think a third way, and I'm sharing these as mine. Don't be thinking I'm judging you. I'm sharing these as mine. And the third way would be fear. Fear of crossing boundaries, barriers. What's going to happen if I cross this line to this person? What happens if I cross this racial line? What happens if I cross this poverty line? What happens? And so fear, and so we would rather just stay in our lanes rather than engage beyond our comfort zones. And so for all those reasons, I feel like we missed the boat. For all those reasons, I think we're not living the ways that Jesus would have us to live as followers of Christ, who are saying and doing the things that he did. And so here's some advice. It's not mine, but I'm going to give it to you because I think it's helpful. I want you to think about this soberly, right? Think about your life, right? How you spend your life, how you spend your money. What will it mean for you to live in such a way that you could love your neighbors, all of our neighbors, right? The poor, the hungry, the foreigner, the sick, and the ones in prison. What will it take for you to live in such a way that you could actually do that? I think one thing is we say we're too busy. How can we streamline our life? How can we say no to certain things so that we can have a little bit more time to be able to access that, right? How can we have a little bit more time so that we're not just doing everything just to keep everything together and going? That's one. How can we streamline our time so we could have time? The second thing I think is money. Is money. I know it's hard because everything has gone up in price, but how can we budget our finances so that we're not living at the top end of our budget? How can we live at maybe 80%, maybe 75%, so that we could have a little extra that we can use and have available to serve and to give? How about that? How about that? I mean, it may mean that you don't get to drive that car. It may mean that you don't get that second home, right? Or whatever it is, and there's no judgment in terms of your budget or where you are. You've earned what you've gotten for the most part, right? So what I'm saying is, as a follower of Christ, can you live under your budget so that you could actually use some of that budget to go towards something else? I would love for our church to be a place like that. For us to reserve a certain amount of money, certain percentage of our funding to go, that's my treasurer back there, certain parts of our funding so that it could go towards those that are most in need. And the third is, how can I look for opportunities to cross that bridge, to cross those barriers and lines. It doesn't have to be big, right? But can you maybe look to do this if there is maybe a person maybe of a different race, a different background, right? Different maybe class or whatever the category is. Would you take on just one person that you say you want to reach out to and say, hey, I'd like to get to know you a little better? Maybe we could go for coffee or whatever it is. Would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing to, just one person in your life that you know, that you run into, to say, I want to cross this barrier intentionally because I want to get to know this person because Jesus says he is in this person. He says, I am serving him in this person, so how can I do that? So those are the three things that I want to share with you today. That we're called to love our neighbors as ourselves. And sometimes we've we've closed ourselves off so well that we can't really do what the Bible is telling us to do. And so this coming week, I want you to reflect soberly, right? What are ways that we can become less busy? What are ways that we could reduce a little bit of our budget so we can have some extra to give? And what is the way that I can cross a barrier to make a connection? Because Jesus says you will find me there. And Jesus says, when you do this, you are loving your neighbor as yourself. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.